For today's cup of coffee, we're going to be talking about something that, it's peculiar to Appalachia, and yet its origins was from those who came from Europe to this area. And some may have heard of this before, and some may not have. And this was about sin eaters. And I have alluded to this a lot. Now, this tradition I have not seen practiced. Mm-hmm. And I got the information from, it's called Lost Creek Medicine Show blogspot, and this was from August the 20th, 2014. And I found on a more recent website, exact same thing. They didn't give the person credit either.
That's called plagiarism.
Yeah, that's just tacky. Yeah. Don't steal other people's shit.
Yeah, don't do that.
It's pretty simple. And I mean, even though I don't have the author's name, I can give the web address and different things like that to give credit to whomever. Mm-hmm. So it's never an intention of taking somebody else's work or anything like that, because like I said, it just ain't cool.
We're just reading articles, and if they don't have the name on the article, that's not our fault.
Right. And it would have been interesting to find out where the person was from that did write this, whether they were one of us or not.
Maybe they just wanted to be anonymous.
Well, it could be too, but I mean, there's a difference between people who live in the Appalachian Mountains and those who look at us from the outside.
Right. Yeah.
And we're not looked at kindly.
No, we really aren't.
So anyhow, it was interesting. And we are a separate culture.
Absolutely we are.
Even within the United States, there are several different cultures. And people, for whatever reason, don't want to think of Appalachian culture at all, period.
Nobody wants to consider us a culture.
No, they don't. They don't. Like I said, they don't want to think about us at all. We are throwaway people.
Yeah, pretty much.
And you know what? That's okay with us.
Well, when the time comes to survive, they'll be learning from us.
Well, that's all right. But one of the articles, I went through several, and one of them was written by somebody from Seattle. Now, you tell me what the hell somebody from Seattle knows about our,
nobody knows
our place here in the world.
Nobody from Seattle, unless they have family from here, they don't know shit.
Well, from just the first few sentences that I read, and I stopped right there, and I thought, no, this is just going to make me angry. And I don't need assistance feeling angry in today's world. Anyhow, sin eaters, this is an ancient practice according to this individual, and it is.
Is this the one that you said you would get angry with?
No, I didn't read that one. This is the Lost Creek Medicine Show. This one is actually very well written.
Okay.
But this individual said that he was surprised to find that sin eating had a not so distant history in Europe and right here in Appalachia. Well, it says right here, so I'm going to assume that person is right here.
Yeah.
And I did find out that Appalachia is a Native American word which meant never-ending mountains.
You didn't know that?
I didn't. Did you know that?
Yes.
Well, why didn't you share that with?
Because I thought you knew.
Don't assume I know anything. Don't assume.
Oh my God.
No. But I tell you something, it's a mountain chain that starts like up in Maine and goes down through Georgia or something.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge.
It goes on forever.
But it's wonderful.
And the sin eater was usually a social outcast. They lived on the fringe of society. And
like us?
Sort of like no, worse than us. They had been sort of shunned by the rest of the people. And they would be basically called on at the death of a loved one. That was about the only time when somebody needed them. That's the only time that they, bothered with them.
Of course.
And traditionally they would come wearing a dark cloak and hood. And then what they would do is eat a meal that had been placed upon the corpse. And
that's horrifying.
Well, it was supposedly that the sins went into the food offering.
The fuck?
And the sin eater would then usually recite some whispered lines, they said, So it could have been prayers or whatever. And then when they consumed the food, it absolved the deceased of all their worldly sins. So what they did, they consumed the sins of the individual.
Okay.
And that's the tradition.
But what's going to happen when those people die?
Exactly. Well, I'm getting to that. And this actually used a quote here a question that I had asked for many, many years. It says, throughout history, many professions have risen from death rituals, including undertakers and morticians. In days of old, professional mourners were hired to wail and lament the passing of a family member. Remember me telling you that my grandmother could have been one of those?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she would have been high dollar on that. So she did it well. And others were hired to sit with the dead until the time of burial. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay? We're going to get to that.
Okay, I didn't have questions on that.
You looked like you was getting ready to ask something. Now, while sin eaters were paid for their services, it was usually a very small amount of money. And there was a dark stigma attached to the sin eaters, who were believed to carry the sins they ate along with them, the sum of which made them unclean and evil in the eyes of their neighbors who shunned them. And this is the question that has been put forth: who eats the sin eaters' sins? Yeah.
All right.
And it was commonly believed that for voluntary, it was commonly believed that for voluntarily taking the sins of others upon them, that the sin eater was damned to eternal life in hell. Now, see, I don't believe that. I don't believe that, because it was a matter of sacrificing oneself to take on the sins of the others throughout this journey.
And so, because of all that, they're just damned.
Well, that's what it says. You know, that was
bullshit.
That was the belief of some. Yeah, I can't.
That is high-key bullshit.
Yeah, I can't see that being accurate. It says the origins of this tradition can be traced back to Egypt and Greece, and the practices. Sin eating, I'm having difficulty talking again tonight, also stems from the Catholic rite of absolution, the forgiveness of sins by a priest that's near the time of death. And in order for those who die unexpectedly to be absolved, sin eaters became common in Wales and Ireland in the 18th and 19th century, with immigrants bringing the practice with them to the mountains of Appalachia. While the ritual of sin eating varied by region, the sin eater usually lived in a remote area away from others. The practice was somewhat taboo, and so few accounts survived. That doesn't surprise me, because there's a lot of things that you will pass down to other family members, but you don't talk about to outsiders. And especially people that are not from here.
Because if it's not part of your family, why share it with other people?
Because, again, secrets keep us sick.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that we're not as open, it's not that we're, not a welcoming people. Mm-hmm. We are a people that have been used and abused for generations. And so it's a matter of gaining trust. And, like I said, we'll be kind to people. We'll be welcoming to people. But once you screw us over, that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
So and family. Oh, my God. Ain't nobody will screw you over like family. Let's see what it says. In Appalachia, the sin eater seemed to be an anonymous member of the community. His identity secret while he lived a regular life inside the community. So that's pretty cool. That some of them, it was almost like executioners. You know how some executioners, they would wear the mask and nobody knew who they were?
Yeah.
I mean, and that happens, when they were still using the electric chair and stuff like that. That's what they would do. Somebody would be hooded so that,
That's honestly scary to see someone with, you see the hooded figure before, you die. That is really scary.
Well, yeah, because, it's the ones that were dead, but the other people still have to live in the community. Mm-hmm. They had a job to do. So the sin eater could be summoned upon the death of a loved one, enter the home where the family would have prepared a meal and place it on the chest of the corpse, or pass it over the body. And once the food was eaten, and the sin eater would say something to the effect of, I give easement now to thee for thy earthly sins, dear whomever, I pawn my own soul. And so, in some ways, it's like the scapegoat.
Yeah.
And his job done, the sin eater left without saying another word, only to appear again when he was summoned. And it's just like, in the Bible it talks about you had the two goats. One of them was, as far as the priest's hand was placed upon that goat, and that he was to carry the sins of the people away from the encampment. And there were a couple of times that the goat started to come back to the encampment, and so they learned that they would put the goat near a cliff or something like that to carry the sins over the edge so that they couldn't come back.
All right.
And the practice seems
to odd.
The practice seems to have died out around the turn of the 20th century in Europe, though a handful of reports continued through the 1930s. And here in America, tales of sin eating persisted in North Carolina, West Virginia, and that's where we are. We are in southwestern Virginia. And these accounts claim to occur through the 1950s, with alleged accounts occurring in remote areas within the last decade, although these reports have not been validated. And again, this was written in 2014. So, could there be little places that this still happens? I have no doubt of it.
Honestly, I would believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that still happens in in places that we have no idea about.
Oh yeah, because there's places up deeper in these mountains. I mean, we feel absolutely metropolitan because we're close to the interstate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some
we
of
can
these
just go
places,
to one of these high-end towns with no problem.
Some of these places are so remote that it's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Like I said, Appalachian culture is very interesting, and if you want to see a prime example of that, go to War, West Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was spooky.
Yeah. And I mean, but good people up there. It's just, it is a different. The rest of the nation has no clue about our culture for the most part.
Nope.
Now, there was an episode of Rod Serling's Night Gallery called Sins of the Fathers, which featured a sin eater, and I remember watching that years ago.
Right.
There was another in 2003 movie called The Order, which featured Heath Ledger, who played a priest that was sort of a sin eater. And then the most famous one, and unfortunately it took over everything, every search just about. There was a movie in 2007 that is called The Last Sin Eater. And I have not seen the movie,
I've never heard of that movie before at all.
Well, it tells the story of a community of second-generation Welsh immigrants here in the Appalachian Mountains and a dark secret they share. And it's said to portray the ritual of sin eating closely to what actually occurred in the mountains long ago. And many traditions, sin eating seems to have died out in Europe and Appalachia, but whispering here and there allude to the possibility of it still being practiced in remote areas, and I don't know why they became redundant on that. Yeah. Another tradition that I would like to talk about, that is something called sitting with the dead.
Ooh.
And I think that's not that peculiar to a lot of the South and stuff.
Isn't that like where you just sit with the corpse to make sure it doesn't sit up?
You do. And in years gone by,
if it sits up, you get a frying pan and bonk.
Well, I had, never taken part but I was born in 1965, so a lot of this stuff was done by those who were older than I was. Funeral homes, by that point, had come into being. But prior to that, how people did around here when somebody died, it was a matter of usually the women that they would take the body and they would prepare it, which included bathing the body. They had winding sheets, and they would, that, or if they were going to sit with the dead, what they would do, they would either have, which was usually a homemade casket, And on some of the things I was looking at, some of them would take almost like sow horses and a door or something, put a sheet or whatever it was, and lay the body on top of that. Now, I never did hear of people doing that, but as far as them having the coffins and stuff, that's usually what they would do. And then it was one of those that family members would gather. And people in this area, when somebody dies, one of the first things that you think about doing is taking food to the home.
Yeah, that is absolutely one tradition that stays.
And I had wondered if that was some kind of throwback to the sin eaters, but I think it's just a matter of being courteous, recognizing that the family is not going to have the time or feel like, cooking. And with everybody coming in to, send their condolences and stuff, you've got people there, you eat, you sit there and you talk, and that is one of the most comforting things for somebody that is grieving. There comes a point in time where you do it's like, y'all go. I've had enough, y'all go. But that fellowship, and to remind somebody, it's almost like a celebration of life.
Mm-hmm.
But that mourning process, we still around here, not so much in the more urban areas, but if there is a funeral procession, if at all possible, people pull off to the side of the road out of respect.
Yep, but I see it becoming less and less.
Well, that's a sad thing.
Absolutely, it is.
So, but sitting with the dead also was a matter of sort of the old Victorian thing where they were afraid these people were cataleptic or whatever and weren't really dead. That was this fear because it had happened, but I'd say like everything else, it was blown out of proportion as far as the amount of people that were buried alive.
Yeah.
I never heard of anybody here having the bail system.
No one here. That was in the rich
England.
neighbor. That was also rich stuff.
Right, that if somebody was, you could ring the bell.
Yeah, there's also these weird horn things, like it was almost like a tube. Yeah,
Oh my
and
God.
you yell in it, and it had like this, like those ear horns.
Right.
That was what it was up top, and you just at the bottom,
Right.
you just yell.
Oh God, that's horrible.
Help me!
Who is that?
Get
to
me
hear
out
it?
of here!
But that was also prior to embalming practices.
Mm-hmm.
And, those were not a thing for quite a while here. I think that a lot of people are going to start returning to more traditional funerals just out of the
cheaper
prices. Yeah. I mean, and there is absolutely, as long as the body is buried within like 24 hours.
Which is what's supposed to happen anyway.
Absolutely, you're supposed to be buried
Embalming
in 24
is
hours.
just for...
It's for show.
Yeah.
So, but as far as there are people that have lots of stories as far as sitting with the dead. Ray Stevens, I will include a link to his song. Ray Stevens is hilarious anyhow. But, talking about people sitting with the dead, there's some different odd things that happen with rigor mortis. And, yeah.
God, these fuckers are hard to sweep up once they pass rigor mortis.
Yeah. Well, and that was just like, when I was little and we would slaughter hogs.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't part of that because kid and, that's
you don't
not,
want to
that was a male thing. That was a male bonding experience to go up there. And there's a lot of work that goes into.
I would never consider that a bonding experience.
Well, it was something
let alone
that the
a
men
male
did.
bonding experience.
Well, you wasn't raised in part of that. You missed that part of your culture, and I'm sorry that you did.
I am perfectly fine with missing
But
that part
it
of my
is
culture.
a very disturbing thing to have a carcass that's split half in two and have it oink. Yeah.
That is horrible.
Well, what it was a matter, the head was already gone. So it was just as far as the trachea or whatever it was, but it freaked me out.
And you heard it?
I did.
Did you see it oink?
It was just this weird noise that came out, and it was like, because what we would do, we had sow horses and we had plywood. And after the animal was, cut in pieces and different things like that, it would be laid there.
That's like the fish that have
before
already
people, so that people could continue the butchering process.
That's like when they salt frog legs and then they start twitching and moving
Well,
along
yeah.
with raw fish and such.
Well,
It's
you know.
disturbing.
It is disturbing, but this was a matter of preparing food. This was a matter of understanding that it was the sacrifice of an animal so that we could eat.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of honoring that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you something, we were taught, it's like, no, you don't kill something just for the hell of killing it.
Absolutely, you don't.
Even people, now there are wasteful people here
Very wasteful.
that when they hunt, that they will take only certain parts of the deer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's despicable because there's people around here that could use the rest of that deer.
They could use the food that
Sure
it would
they
have
could.
been.
And so, you know, it's amazing how much of our culture has gone away just through internet, TV, all this stuff, especially the way that we are portrayed through, you know, Hollywood, if you want to call it that. That people, you know, there was a lot of the kids that grew up ashamed of their culture, ashamed of how they speak, because it's very easy to be maligned and made, you know, ridiculed. Nobody wants that.
Absolutely not. Nobody wants that.
So it's a matter of trying to preserve, and there are a few that are trying to preserve our culture right now.
Just a few.
Yeah. But they're out
Hey,
there.
at least they're trying.
Yeah. But I actually, as far as people where you sat with the body, was usually in the living room because there's not a lot of wealthy people in this area.
No, it's really not.
So the living room is usually the largest room in the home, and that's where people can usually sit and different things like that. That and the kitchen. People gather either in the living room or the kitchen.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I was growing up, it
Or
was
both.
the women were in the kitchen and then the men were wherever else. And that is what we do. We cook. We cook and clean. That's when somebody dies. You take food to somebody else, you cook, and that's part of a stress thing.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to keep yourself busy.
Absolutely.
And so it just... my best friend when I was in high school, and when her father died, and she lived back up on a mountain. I mean, truly, it was a trek. You had to have a truck or a 4-wheel drive or whatever to get up and down there.
Uh-huh.
And so I had a Chevette, so it was not equipped to drive up that road. And it was odd because she got to come to my house from time to time, but she never invited me to hers.
Mm-hmm.
And God love her, I think that, and there's no way that I would have ever made her feel bad, but she felt bad about herself just because TV. That's all you can say. But her father was there in the casket in the living room.
Yeah.
And it was just very similar to my father's people. So there was no need that she would have ever, for her to have ever been ashamed.
Yeah.
But you go in, view the corpse, give your condolences and stuff like that, and then you tell the people, it's like, hey, if you need anything, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't impose yourself, or at least most people don't. You've always got some that it's like, and you're like, oh, please God, go home.
Yeah. You're like, thank you, but goodbye.
Yeah. So interesting traditions here in the mountains that we get to share with you all.
Yeah.
But now who eats the sin of the sin eater? That's the question for today.
Yep. I guess another sin eater that takes his place.
Well, it's a matter of God. You can see that as a matter of He's the only one that can absolve somebody's sin.
That is true.
That's also part of Appalachian culture too. It's all about God and family and country.
Yeah.
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 So that is part of our people. If you've had experiences with paranormal, supernatural, encounters with UFOs, aliens, cryptids, if there's any regional or family myths, legends, different regional things that you would like to share, like the tradition of the sin eaters and stuff,
Yeah.
just send me an email at cupofcoffeewithscream@gmail.com, and that's always in the description box. That one I keep standard so that I don't forget that. Some of the other ones I may forget. But you all have a beautiful, blessed day filled with life.
Yeah.
All right.
Enjoy your life.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.